Hello, and welcome to the Science of Yesterday, a podcast that delves into the fascinating ways in which science has played a role in shaping our understanding of the past, hosted by two history and science buffs, respectively. My name is the Archivist, and I will be explaining the history behind some fascinating events.
And my name is The Alchemist, and I'll explain how the science works behind those events. This is the first episode, the pilot episode of our series, and for this episode, we will be focusing on ancient Mesopotamia. First, let's start into the emergence of farmers within Mesopotamia.
So, the emergence of farming happened in the Fertile Crescent within the Middle East. This happened around 8500 BC. But it also happened in China around 7500 BC, and in North and South America in 3500 to 2500 BC. The Neolithic Revolution, as it is called, then spread from these regions to all continents. The crops grown in the Middle East reached, for example, Greece in 6500 BC, then the rest of Europe. Of course, after the emergence of farming, populations were starting to discover the economic benefit of farming and breeding. Compared to traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering activities, they gradually abandoned their nomadic lifestyle and settled down with increased population densities. There were more trading opportunities and more times for creation. The inventions farming created were irrigation, as one of them. Now I will throw it over to my co-host to explain what irrigation is.
Hello. Basically, irrigation is the supply of water to land or crops to help growth, typically by means of channels, and these channels spread the water through simple machines such as a sloped plane to use gravity to supply the water throughout all of the crops necessary. Now, plants use water to live, and in order to supply the water to the plants, the water has to flow beside the plants in order to sink into the earth and then have the plants use the roots to take the water out and go into the actual plant. And using these sloped plains, the water does this almost automatically as long as there is a good enough supply of this water. Now, nutrients also need to get to the plants, and they can't do that from infertile soil. So, water also helps with that because that can supply nutrients from other parts of the soil, maybe more nutrient rich, and make some of the other parts of the farm or whatever more nutrient rich. And basically this helps add like vitamins and iron to the actual plants to help them grow. And pushing it back over to the archivist to help explain more interesting events that happened within this incredible era.
Oh, more inventions that were made were stuff such as the wheel, which we will delve into later. But since, as I said earlier, populations started to become more dense and people started settling into areas, led to the creation of societies and the creation of the bartering system. Which we will also delve into later. But for now, we will talk about what I said with the creation of the wheel. The wheel is so incredibly important to society as a whole because in the 4th millennium BC in Lower Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, when the Sumerian people inserted rotating axles into solid discs of wood, it led to, advanced major scientific advancements in two areas. First, transport. It was used to cart animals, cart food, and that kind of thing. But And, of course, it was used in battle, because, we've all heard of battle chariots. Who hasn't heard of a battle chariot? Second, and more importantly, it contributed to the mechanization of agriculture. So you know how he was talking about crop irrigation? That was only possible because of the wheel. And windmills. Wheel. Everything hinged on a wheel. And that's why people say it is probably the most important invention of all time. Now, back to the alchemist, so he can explain to you how the wheel works and why it makes things easier.
Now, when given an example, if you have a giant box filled to the brim with a really heavy object,
such as gold,
that works with gold. If you need to push that up a steep incline, you would need to exert a certain amount of force against that object. However, there are actually two other forces working against you, which is friction, which is caused by tiny bumps in surfaces, which get stuck together and create an opposing force, and also gravity, because it is a steep incline. So, if you need to push that up, instead of reducing the weight, maybe reduce one of the other friction. Maybe reduce one of the other force types. So, for friction, a wheel helps a ton, because friction actually works in your favor. Because when friction is pushed the other way, the wheel moves forward, causing an even greater forward acceleration. And force is equal to mass times acceleration according to Newton's second law, which basically makes it really easy to push something of immense weight up a steep incline. Now back over to the archivist to talk about literature's creation.
So, from the creation of the wheel and the emergence of farming causing societies to be born and causing language to almost be regulated, because instead of speaking small incoherent dialects, thousands of those within just one language, because you live in a specific nomadic tribe, it started to centralize. And once it was centralized into usually 1, 2, or 3 dialects, a language that uses writing would appear. The first emergences of writing happened in Sumer Middle East, which is Sumerian Middle East. That happened in 3300 BC, then in Egypt in 3000 BC, China in 1300 BC, and Mexico in 600 BC. Now, you can see all of this is quite a long time after the emergence of farmers, because societies didn't happen immediately after the creation of farming. They slowly were made, so was language. Now, what language did for us is extremely important. It was the birth of science and math and the birth of history. Because, you take a language, you write it down, okay? That is a irreplaceable piece of history that anyone can read thousands upon thousands of years later. And, of course, that is way better of a system than oral traditions, because from oral traditions, you can only go so far till they stop being taught to generations. So you lose stuff. Now, of course, languages change as they move. Dialects change slightly over the years to either simplify it more, and they move, okay? And then once they've moved, they change as they develop to create newer and newer languages. And the only problem with that is once you have a new language, is if the place where the old language is destroyed, that language stops existing. And that is extremely upsetting to someone who loves history, such as myself, because think about it. Mycenaean in Greece, Linear A and Linear B scripts. We can kind of read Linear B, but we know nothing about Linear A. We cannot read it. That is so much history, thousands of years of just stuff we can't understand. It is like a skip in time. So that's why languages, their creation and keeping them alive are so incredibly important. Next, we will be talking about how, of course, once societies were created and evolved to have language, of course, you don't want to barter. You don't want to give two of your sheep for two bales of hay. You want to give this small little chunk of rare sparkly thing for some hay. So you keep all your stuff, but now you have more. And then little Tommy over there, who you traded the funny shiny thing for, now he has less stuff, but he also has the shiny thing, which he, of course, can go to someone else and say, hey, give me your stuff. I have this. And they're like, okay, here's stuff. But the problem with that is that it created a class system. Because whoever had more shiny metal thing at the beginning could decide its value almost, and until it was regulated by full, strong governments, which even though it is regulated by governments, it's still not the best, the person who you're trying to buy from decides its value. So, of course, you walk on over to your Jimmy, okay? And that guy just bought 2 bales of hay from you, so now you only have 2 bales of hay, but you need some more to feed your cow. So you walk over to Tommy and you're like, hey, Tommy, can I get 3 bales of hay for this 1 coin? And Tommy's like, no. And you're like, but he bought 2 bales of hay for 1 coin. Exactly. So I'm going to need 2 coins for 3 bales of hay. Wait, but that's not the correct amount contributed. But like, yeah, I know. I want more money. So it created this class system where the poor people had to like scrounge up for all the money they could find, and the rich people just got to keep all their stuff and more. And of course this made greed much worse, because instead of being okay with what you have and giving what you have for stuff you don't have, you give stuff that you decide the value of, so it could be worth everything in the world to you or worth nothing for stuff you don't have. It made the humans as a species way more greedy. But of course, you might be wondering why metal was used. Specifically stuff like gold and copper and iron, which were something at the time. But to explain that, we must pass it back to the alchemist.
Hey,
Go
it's
ahead.
me again. Alright.
Been a while.
Basically, metal is rare. And not only because it can be lost as a form of decay or gas, but it's also scattered very unevenly throughout the Earth's crust, mixed with rock and combined with oxygen or other elements, which makes some metals porous and some not. So there are many different types of metals because of this. And because metal cannot be replaced, there is a limited supply. We could run out of metal. And that is just a fact. So that creates a low supply. So with a low supply and a high demand for metal, it can be used as a currency because it has value. Value is basically equal to the supply and demand. If the demand is low and the supply is high, it's worth less. If the supply is more and the demand... If the supply is less, and the demand is more, then the that material becomes more valuable because there's less of it and so many more people want it. Now, because this metal, which is pretty hard to get, and it has value, it can be used as a replacement for other things. And that is the start for a good currency. So, with that said, thank you for watching the first episode of The Science of Yesterday. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the fascinating intersection of science and history. And
until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep wondering. See you again soon.